She's been seeing someone else, Jim. I'm sorry, but Rebecca's leaving you. Those words from Michael, my best friend since college, hit me in the chest like a sledgehammer as we sat across from each other at Brew Haven. Not at home, where a man should hear such news. Not from Rebecca herself. In the middle of a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was taking my first real lunch break in 3 weeks. I remember setting my cup down slowly, careful not to spill. Always careful, always controlled. That had been my way through 15 years of marriage. How long have you known? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. 2 weeks, Michael admitted, unable to meet my eyes. She asked me not to tell you until she figured out how to handle things. I nodded once, closed my laptop and said, I see. Michael had been our friend, my friend, long before he became our financial advisor, back when the idea of needing someone to manage investments seemed like a fantasy. Now I knew why he'd insisted on meeting in person rather than our usual monthly call. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm James Wilson, 42 years old, co-founder and CTO of NeuraTech, a Portland-based AI startup that had consumed nearly every waking hour of my life for the past 4 years. My marriage had apparently ended somewhere during those endless weeks of coding, investor meetings, and desperate attempts to keep our company afloat while larger competitors circled. I just hadn't known it until now. I drove home in silence. No radio, no calls, nothing but the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers against a typical Portland drizzle. Our house, a renovated Craftsman in Eastmoreland that we'd purchased when NeuraTech landed its first significant funding round, sat dark against the grey afternoon. Rebecca's car wasn't in the driveway. Of course not. She'd be at Elevation Fitness, the boutique gym where she'd started spending 3 hours daily after claiming our home office setup during the pandemic had ruined her back. I let myself in, hearing the hollow echo of the door closing behind me. The house felt different already, as if it knew what I didn't. I moved through rooms that suddenly seemed less familiar, cataloguing small changes I'd been too busy to notice. Rebecca's collection of art books missing from the coffee table, the absence of her favorite throw blanket from the couch, the spare bedroom closet half empty where her winter clothes should have been. She'd been preparing to leave for weeks, methodically extracting herself from our shared life, while I worked myself to exhaustion, trying to secure our future. I poured 3 fingers of the Japanese whiskey I'd been saving for when we finally turned a profit, when I could cut back to 60-hour weeks instead of 80, when we could start talking about the family Rebecca had once wanted. I didn't call her, didn't demand explanations. Instead, I opened my home office safe and retrieved the document I hadn't thought about in years, our prenuptial agreement. As the son of a family law attorney who'd watched too many of his father's clients lose everything in divorce, I'd insisted on a prenup despite Rebecca's initial reluctance. It kills the romance, she'd argued back when we were 27, and convinced love conquered all. I'd compromised on many points, but had been adamant about the infidelity clause, a provision my father had practically mandated after watching my mother leave for her tennis instructor when I was 12. The prenup isn't about not trusting you, I had told Rebecca then. It's insurance we'll never need. Like airbags in a car you never plan to crash. Now I was surveying the wreckage, searching for the financial equivalent of those airbags. The clause was clear. Proven infidelity would result in the unfaithful party forfeiting their claim to stock options, business assets, and intellectual property developed during the marriage. When we'd signed it, NeuraTech had been nothing but an idea scribbled on napkins during late-night sessions at our favorite brewery. Now those options were worth millions, at least on paper. I heard the garage door open at 8:42 p.m. Rebecca entered through the kitchen, stopping short when she saw me at the dining table with the prenup laid out beside my laptop. "Jim," she said, her voice carefully measured. She looked different, stronger, more defined in her expensive athletic wear. The physical transformation I'd been too preoccupied to fully register over the past year. "I wasn't expecting you home." "Clearly," I replied, taking another sip of whiskey. "Michael told me, though I wish you had." She set her gym bag down, maintaining her distance. "I was going to this weekend. I've been trying to find the right time." "Hard to find the right time when I'm never home," I acknowledged. "Who is he?" Rebecca straightened as if relieved to finally speak the truth. "Ryan, he's a trainer at Elevation." "Ryan Matthews? The one you hired for private sessions to help with your back?" "Yes," I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. "At least it's not a cliché, right? Wife leaves workaholic husband for personal trainer?" "That's not fair, Jim. This isn't about Ryan. It's about us. About what's been broken for years." I closed the prenup document, sliding it back into its folder. "Is he why you started talking about separate finances last year? About legally separating your consulting income from our joint accounts?" Her silence was answer enough. She'd been planning this longer than I'd realized, creating financial independence while I remained blindly focused on building NeuraTech, believing I was securing our shared future. "I never thought the issue would be infidelity," I said quietly. "I always assumed my failure would be working too much, not being present enough. I expected to lose you because I was neglecting our marriage, not because you found someone else." "It's both, Jim. They're connected." Her voice softened slightly. "You disappeared into NeuraTech. I disappeared into my own life, into fitness, into Ryan." I stood up, suddenly exhausted beyond words. "I'd appreciate if you stayed somewhere else tonight. I need to process this." "This is my house, too," she started, "and according to the agreement we both signed," I cut in, tapping the folder, "there are significant implications for how property gets divided now. But I'm not asking forever. Just tonight." Rebecca studied my face, perhaps seeing something that made her reconsider arguing. She nodded once, grabbed a few items from upstairs, and left without another word. The quick efficiency of her exit confirmed she already had someone to go to. I joined the army after college because I craved structure and clear objectives when my friends seemed adrift in possibilities. 10 years as a software engineer for military systems taught me how to build reliable algorithms, not through flashy innovations, but through methodical attention to detail and redundancies that ensured systems remained operational even under extreme stress. I met Rebecca during a rare weekend leave when my sister insisted I rejoin civilization at a friend's art gallery opening in Portland. Rebecca had been the artist's assistant, a vibrant contrast to the regimented world I inhabited. She laughed freely, challenged my assumptions, and pulled me toward experiences I'd never have chosen for myself. When my military commitment ended, following her to Portland and starting a civilian life felt like stepping into color after years of monochrome. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. NeuraTech began 3 years later when my Army buddy Eric Chen approached me about applying military-grade predictive algorithms to supply chain management. "Companies are flying blind with their inventory," he explained over beers. "We could build something better than anything on the market, using what we learned, developing logistics systems." Rebecca had supported the idea enthusiastically. "Take the risk," she urged, when I hesitated to leave my stable position at a defense contractor. "I believe in you. We have my income while you build something that matters." Those early years were exhilarating. working from our converted garage, securing our first clients, celebrating small victories late into the night. Rebecca had been my sounding board, my comfort when deals fell through, my champion when investors finally took notice. We were partners in every sense. The breaking point came gradually, then suddenly, like the way companies go bankrupt, I suppose. First, we landed BlackRock as a client, their massive infrastructure requiring system customizations that consumed months of 18-hour days. Then, our lead engineer quit, leaving me to cover his responsibilities while we searched for a replacement. The pandemic hit next, creating both unprecedented demand for our inventory prediction software and unprecedented stress as we scaled rapidly while working remotely. Somewhere in that blur of growth and pressure, Rebecca and I began living parallel lives. I worked from my home office while she converted our guest room into a personal gym during lockdown. We stopped eating dinner together, stopped planning weekends away, stopped talking about anything beyond logistics and schedules. When she hired Ryan Matthews for home training sessions during the pandemic, I was relieved. One less thing for me to worry about. I even joined them occasionally when I could pull myself away from work, impressed by Ryan's knowledge and Rebecca's growing strength. I thanked him for fixing my wife's back problems and returned to my endless conference, calls and code reviews. I never saw what was happening right under my roof. 3 days after Michael's revelation, I met with Sarah Jenkins, the daughter of my father's law partner and now a formidable divorce attorney in her own right. Her downtown office overlooked the Willamette River, the water slate grey under heavy clouds. The infidelity clause is strong, Sarah confirmed after reviewing our prenup. But enforcement requires evidence, definitive proof, not just suspicion or third-party statements. What constitutes definitive proof? I asked. Ideally, communications between them acknowledging the relationship, photos or video of intimate contact, financial records showing patterns consistent with an affair, hotel receipts, unusual gifts. Witness testimony helps, but isn't usually sufficient alone. I nodded, thinking of Rebecca's carefully compartmentalized finances over the past year. She's been methodical. They usually are, Sarah agreed, her expression sympathetic but professional. How do you want to proceed, Jim? Full investigation, settlement negotiation. Some people prefer to avoid the messy details and just move forward with an agreement both sides can live with. The question caught me off guard. What did I want? Revenge, justice, just to be done with the whole painful situation. I want what's fair, I finally said. I put everything into building NeuraTech, nights, weekends, vacations we never took. I missed holidays with her family to meet deadlines. If that dedication cost me my marriage, I can accept that responsibility. But I won't let it cost me my company, too. Sarah studied me for a moment. Then we'll need evidence. I can recommend investigators, but given the personal nature of infidelity cases, some clients prefer to gather initial evidence themselves. I left her office with a clearer sense of purpose than I'd felt since Michael's revelation. That evening, I sent Rebecca a carefully worded text. We should talk about how to proceed. Coffee this weekend? Her response came quickly. Saturday, 10 a.m. at Brew Haven? I agreed, then began my own investigation. Not out of some vindictive desire to catch her in the act, but because I needed clarity, evidence to either enforce the prenup or accept that I'd need another approach. First, I reviewed our shared cloud storage that Rebecca had likely forgotten I could access. There, I found her digital trail, hundreds of text messages automatically backed up between her and Ryan, beginning with professional exchanges about draining sessions, evolving to personal conversations, and eventually explicit messages that left no doubt about their relationship. Messages that dated back 11 months. Next, I examined credit card statements from our joint account, which she'd used less frequently over the past year, but hadn't completely abandoned. There were charges for weekend getaways to coastal towns when I'd been told she was visiting her sister in Seattle, restaurant bills for two at high-end establishments on evenings when I'd been working late. The evidence accumulated like lines of code, each element insignificant alone, but creating an undeniable pattern when viewed together. By Friday night, I had compiled a comprehensive document detailing their relationship with timestamps, locations, and expenditures, all obtained legally from accounts and devices I had legitimate access to. Saturday morning, I arrived at Brew Haven 30 minutes early, choosing a quiet corner table away from other patrons. Rebecca arrived precisely at 10, dressed casually, but carefully in clothes I didn't recognize. New life, new wardrobe. "Thank you for suggesting this," she began, after ordering her usual oat milk latte. "I think we need to discuss how to make this transition as smooth as possible." I nodded, allowing her to continue. "I've been talking with a mediator," she said. "I think we can handle this without expensive lawyers if we're both reasonable. I know your company is important to you, and I'm not looking to disrupt NeuraTech's operations." "What are you looking for then?" I asked, my tone neutral. "A fair division. I supported you when NeuraTech was nothing but an idea. I put my own career on hold during those early years. I think half of your founder's equity acknowledges that contribution." I took a sip of my coffee, considering her words. "And if I disagree with that assessment, then things get unnecessarily complicated." Her voice hardened slightly. "Neither of us wants a drawn-out legal battle that damages the company's reputation, just as you're positioning for acquisition." So she knew about the acquisition talks. Information that wasn't public and that I certainly hadn't shared with her. Someone had been talking. I made a mental note to investigate that leak later. "You're right that a legal battle could be damaging," I acknowledged, "which is why I hoped we might be able to refer back to the agreement we both signed." Rebecca's expression tightened. "The prenup is outdated. It doesn't reflect the reality of our marriage or my contributions." "Including your contribution of infidelity with Ryan Matthews for the past 11 months? I asked quietly, sliding a single printed page across the table. It contained a timeline with just enough detail to make it clear what I had discovered. The color drained from her face as she scanned the document. "You've been spying on me?" "No. I've been reviewing accounts and information I legally have access to as your husband. There's more if you'd like to see it." Her fingers pressed against the paper. "This is why you suggested a public meeting, isn't it? So I wouldn't make a scene?" "I suggested a public meeting because I thought it would be more comfortable for both of us." I kept my voice steady. "I'm not trying to humiliate you, Rebecca. I just want to enforce the agreement we both signed. That agreement is punitive and unfair. It's exactly as fair now as it was when we both had lawyers review it 15 years ago," I countered. "The infidelity clause doesn't take everything from you, just claims to business assets developed during our marriage. Your separate property, your portion of our home equity, your retirement accounts, those remain untouched." She stared at me, reassessing. I could almost see her calculating new angles, new approaches. Rebecca had always been adaptive, quick to find alternate paths when obstacles appeared. It was one of the qualities I'd fallen in love with. "What do you want, Jim? To punish me?" I shook my head. "I want to protect what I've built, what I sacrificed our marriage to create. If I'm being honest, I failed as a husband long before you met Ryan. I disappeared into work and left you alone. I understand why you looked elsewhere. But you'll still enforce the clause," she said flatly. "Yes, I will." Our conversation ended shortly after that, with Rebecca agreeing to have her lawyer contact Sarah Jenkins to begin a more formal discussion of terms. As she stood to leave, she paused, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Would it have made a difference if I'd told you I was unhappy sooner?" If I'd given you a chance to change before meeting Ryan. The question caught me off guard with its earnestness. I don't know, I admitted. I'd like to think it would have, that I would have recognized what I was losing before it was gone. She nodded once. I should have tried, that's on me. Then she walked away, leaving me with cold coffee and complicated emotions. The following weeks brought a flurry of legal communications as Rebecca's attorney attempted various arguments against the prenup's validity. Sarah Jenkins deflected each one efficiently, presenting our evidence without unnecessary drama. Eventually, Rebecca's lawyer requested a settlement conference. She's ready to accept the infidelity clause implications, Sarah informed me, but is asking for some accommodations on the house and personal property division. We met at Sarah's office on a Thursday afternoon. The four of us arranged on opposite sides of a polished conference table. Rebecca avoided my gaze while her attorney outlined their proposed settlement. She would relinquish all claims to NeuraTech equity and intellectual property in accordance with the prenup's infidelity provision. In exchange, she wanted to keep the house by buying out my share at a favorable valuation. That seems reasonable. I told Sarah during our private consultation in her adjacent office. I was planning to move anyway, too many memories. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You're entitled to a 50-50 split on the house value. Her proposal undervalues your share by about $200,000. I understand, but I want this finished. She studied me for a moment. This isn't about the money for you, is it? No, I admitted. It's about what the money represents. The company equity represents my sacrifice, my vision, my work. The house represents a life I thought we were building together. I don't need to squeeze every dollar from that particular symbol. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll draw up the agreement with your concession on the house, but no other compromises. The business assets remain protected as per the prenup. We returned to the conference room where I spoke directly to Rebecca. For the first time that day, I'll accept your proposal on the house. The rest stays as outlined in the prenup. Relief washed across her face, quickly replaced by caution. And that's it, we're done. Once the papers are signed, I confirmed, clean break. As our attorneys finalized details, Rebecca pulled me aside near the water cooler. Thank you, she said quietly, for not making this uglier than it needed to be. I nodded, surprised to find I genuinely wished her well despite everything. Be happy, Rebecca. I mean that. 3 months after our settlement was finalized, NeuraTech announced its acquisition by a Silicon Valley tech giant. The deal valued my founder's shares at just over $22 million. I wondered if Rebecca regretted her decisions when she heard the news, but I never asked. Some questions are better left unanswered. I took 6 months off after the acquisition, traveling aimlessly at first, then with increasing purpose. I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail sections I'd always been too busy to explore, visited friends I'd neglected during NeuraTech's growth years, reconnected with my sister and her family, becoming the uncle I'd promised to be but rarely had time for. In Santiago, Chile, while volunteering with a tech education program, I met Olivia Chen, an environmental engineer working on water conservation projects. Our relationship developed slowly, deliberately, with clear communication about expectations and boundaries. When things became serious, I was transparent about my past, both my workaholic tendencies and the prenup that had ultimately protected my company. I understand the need for financial clarity, Olivia said, when I nervously brought up the topic of another prenuptial agreement. But maybe this time build in protections for the relationship too, not just the assets. What do you mean? I asked. Mandatory vacation time, technology-free weekends, a requirement that both partners attend couples therapy at the first sign of disconnection. She smiled. Financial consequences for working more than 60 hours a week, 3 weeks. In a row. I laughed, then realized she was serious. You want to put work-life balance requirements in a prenup? I want us to protect what really matters, she said simply. The best prenup is one we never need to use because we're actively nurturing what we've built together. Today, I run a much smaller tech consultancy with strict boundaries around my time. My contract with clients includes clauses about unavailability after 6 p.m. and on weekends. My calendar has recurring blocks for family time, personal projects, and absolute downtime. I still create value, still solve important problems, but I no longer sacrifice everything else on the altar of professional success. Sometimes I think about calling Rebecca to thank her. Not for leaving. That will always be a wound that healed. Imperfectly, but for forcing me to confront the imbalance in my life before it was too late. Before I woke up at 65 with enormous wealth and nothing else. I don't make that call, though. Some chapters are better left closed. The prenup did exactly what it was designed to do, protect what I had built professionally when my personal life imploded. What it couldn't do was protect the marriage itself. No legal document can safeguard a relationship against neglect, no matter how meticulously drafted. That's the lesson I carry forward. Contracts have their place, but presence has greater power. Build safeguards for what you value, yes, but remember that the most valuable things require more than legal protection. They require constant attention, care, and prioritization. In the end, I didn't lose NeuraTech, but I lost something far harder to rebuild. I'm careful not to make that mistake again. I let myself in, hearing the hollow echo of the door closing behind me. The house felt different already, as if it knew what I didn't. I moved through rooms that suddenly seemed less familiar, cataloging small changes I'd been too busy to notice. Rebecca's collection of art books missing from the coffee table, the absence of her favorite throw blanket from the couch, the spare bedroom closet, half empty, where her winter clothes should have been. She'd been preparing to leave for weeks, methodically extracting herself from our shared life while I worked myself to exhaustion trying to secure our future. I poured 3 fingers of the Japanese whiskey I'd been saving for when we finally turned a profit, when I could cut back to 60-hour weeks instead of 80, when we could start talking about the family Rebecca had once wanted. I didn't call, or didn't demand explanations. Instead, I opened my home office safe and retrieved the document I hadn't thought about in years. Our prenuptial agreement. As the son of a family law attorney who'd watched too many of his father's clients lose everything in divorce, I'd insisted on a prenup, despite Rebecca's initial reluctance. It kills the romance, she'd argued back when we were 27 and convinced love conquered all. I'd compromised on many points, but had been adamant about the infidelity clause, a provision my father had practically mandated after watching my mother leave for her tennis instructor when I was 12. The prenup isn't about not trusting you, I had told Rebecca then. It's insurance we'll never need, like airbags in a car you never planned to crash. Now I was surveying the wreckage, searching for the financial equivalent of those airbags. The clause was clear. Proven infidelity would result in the unfaithful party forfeiting their claim to stock options, business assets, and intellectual property developed during the marriage. When we'd signed it, NeuraTech had been nothing but an idea scribbled on napkins during late-night sessions at our favorite brewery. Now those options were worth millions, at least on paper. I heard the garage door open at 8:42 p.m. Rebecca entered through the kitchen, stopping short when she saw me at the dining table with the prenup laid out beside my laptop. "Jim," she said, her voice carefully measured. She looked different, stronger, more defined in her expensive athletic wear. The physical transformation I'd been too preoccupied to fully register over the past year. "I wasn't expecting you home." "Clearly," I replied, taking another sip of whiskey. "Michael told me, though I wish you had." She set her gym bag down, maintaining her distance. I was going to. This weekend, I've been trying to find the right time. Hard to find the right time when I'm never home, I acknowledged. Who is he? Rebecca straightened, as if relieved to finally speak the truth. Ryan. He's a trainer at Elevation. Ryan Matthews, the one you hired for private sessions to help with your back. Yes. I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. At least it's not a cliché, right? Wife leaves workaholic husband for personal trainer. That's not fair, Jim. This isn't about Ryan. It's about us, about what's been broken for years. I closed the prenup document, sliding it back into its folder. Is he why you started talking about separate finances last year? About legally separating your consulting income from our joint accounts? Her silence was answer enough. She'd been planning this longer than I'd realized, creating financial independence while I remained blindly focused on building NeuraTech, believing I was securing our shared future. I never thought the issue would be infidelity, I said quietly. I always assumed my failure would be working too much, not being present enough. I expected to lose you because I was neglecting our marriage, not because you found someone else. It's both, Jim. They're connected. Her voice softened slightly. You disappeared into NeuraTech. I disappeared into my own life, into fitness, into Ryan. I stood up, suddenly exhausted beyond words. I'd appreciate if you stayed somewhere else tonight. I need to process this. This is my house too, she started, and according to the agreement we both signed, I cut in, tapping the folder, there are significant implications for how property gets divided now. But I'm not asking forever. Just tonight. Rebecca studied my face, perhaps seeing something that made her reconsider arguing. She nodded once, grabbed a few items from upstairs and left without another word. The quick efficiency of her exit confirmed she already had someone to go to. I spent that night alone in our king-size bed, staring at the ceiling fan's hypnotic rotation. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of falling asleep at my desk or on the office couch, I finally had our bed to myself. Sleep came in fragmented bursts, interrupted by memories that now carried new meanings. Rebecca's sudden interest in fitness 2 years ago, her weekend self-care retreats that had begun 6 months back, the gradual withdrawal of physical affection that I'd attributed to my own neglect rather than her diverted attention. The next morning, I called Eric, my co-founder and the only person at NeuraTech who knew the full extent of my personal life. I need a few days, I told him, my voice rough from whiskey and insomnia. Personal situation. Everything okay with Rebecca? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. Eric and his wife had been the only couple we still occasionally socialized with, though even those gatherings had grown rare as NeuraTech consumed our lives. She's leaving me for her personal trainer. The silence stretched until Eric finally said, "Shit, Jim. I don't know what to say. Nothing to say, just need to handle some things. I'll work remotely when I can. Take whatever time you need. We'll manage." Eric paused. "And Jim, I'm sorry, really." I ended the call and spent the next hours methodically reviewing our finances, creating spreadsheets, tracking joint assets, shared accounts, recurring expenses. My mind retreated to the familiar comfort of data and systems, finding solace in the clarity of numbers when emotions remained too chaotic to process. By afternoon, I needed air. I drove to Forest Park, hiking the Wildwood Trail until my legs burned and sweat soaked through my shirt despite the October chill. The physical exertion cleared my head enough to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding. Whatever mistakes I'd made in our marriage, Rebecca's choice to pursue an affair rather than address our problems directly had changed everything. I returned home to find Rebecca collecting more of her belongings. She froze when I entered, as if caught trespassing in a space that had been hers longer than it had been mine. "We should talk," I said, keeping my distance in the doorway. I thought you needed space. I do, but we also need clarity about what happens next. Rebecca set down the stack of books she'd been gathering. I found an apartment, month-to-month lease, until we figure things out. With Ryan? She hesitated. No, on my own. I need to sort through my own feelings without complications. I nodded, oddly relieved by this small mercy. The image of them immediately setting up house together would have been another wound I wasn't ready to bear. I've consulted an attorney, I said, watching her expression carefully, about the implications of our prenup given the circumstances. Her posture stiffened. Of course you have. Always methodical, always prepared, even for the collapse of your marriage. Our marriage, I corrected quietly. And yes, I'm being methodical because one of us needs to be. There are significant financial considerations here, Rebecca, especially with the acquisition talks. Her eyes widened slightly. What acquisition talks? I studied her reaction, confirming my suspicion that she hadn't known about the preliminary discussions with Apex Technologies, the industry giant that had recently expressed interest in NeuraTech's predictive inventory algorithms. We're in early discussions with potential buyers, nothing concrete yet. When were you planning to tell me about this? Anger edged her voice. Probably around the same time you were planning to tell me about Ryan, I replied evenly. We've both been keeping secrets, it seems. The comparison silenced her momentarily. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from accusation to pragmatism. What does your attorney say about the prenup? That the infidelity clause is enforceable, but requires evidence. You're actually going to try to enforce that? Disbelief colored her words. After everything I've done to support your career, I put my own ambitions on hold while you built NeuraTech. I managed our entire life while you worked 80-hour weeks, and now you want to punish me financially because our marriage failed. No, I said, more sharply than intended. I want to protect what I've sacrificed everything to build, including our marriage, apparently. Rebecca crossed her arms. The prenup is 15 years old, Jim. We signed it when we had nothing. It doesn't reflect the reality of our partnership. The reality where you've been having an affair with your trainer for months while methodically separating your finances in preparation for leaving. That reality? That's not fair. None of this is fair, Rebecca. Not what I did to our marriage by working myself into the ground, and not what you did by turning to someone else instead of confronting me directly. We're well past fair. Now, we're just dealing with consequences. She gathered her books again, a physical retreat from the conversation. I'll have my lawyer contact yours. I'm assuming Sarah Jenkins? Your dad's old partner's daughter. I nodded, not surprised she'd guessed correctly. Sarah had handled our prenup 15 years ago. Rebecca's awareness of this connection, her quick pivot to legal maneuvering, reinforced my suspicion that she'd been preparing for this separation longer than I'd realized. I never wanted it to be like this, Jim. Then maybe you should have chosen differently, I said, stepping aside to let her leave with her armload of belongings. After she left, I poured another measure of whiskey and called my father. Despite our complicated relationship, or perhaps because of it, he was the only person who could truly understand my position. He answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the subtle rasp of recent health struggles. Rebecca's leaving me, I said without preamble, for her personal trainer. His silence spoke volumes, carrying echoes of his own painful past with my mother. The prenup, he finally asked, has an infidelity clause. Good. A single word that contained decades of hard-won wisdom. Do you have proof? Not yet, but I will. Don't let emotion drive your decisions, James. Not anger, not guilt, not nostalgia for what you thought you had. This is business now. His clinical approach should have bothered me, but instead it provided a framework for navigating the chaos. This was business now, a negotiation, a system to be analyzed and managed, not unlike the complex logistical problems I solve daily. At NeuraTech, I won't, I promised. Do you have someone handling this for you, Sarah? Yes. Good, she's the best. He paused. I'm sorry, son, about all of it. Coming from my stoic father, those simple words carried unexpected weight. Thanks, Dad. Me too. The following week passed in a blur of legal consultations, work distractions, and sleepless nights. I threw myself into NeuraTech's operations with renewed focus, as if proving my professional worth could somehow compensate for my personal failure. The acquisition talks with Apex Technologies advanced rapidly, their interest intensified by our latest quarterly results showing 43% year-over-year growth. They're serious, Eric confirmed after our third video conference with their executive team. Term sheet could be coming within weeks, not months. The timing created both opportunity and complication. An acquisition would crystallize the value of our equity, transforming theoretical paper wealth into actual liquid assets. It would also accelerate the divorce proceedings, raising the stakes for both Rebecca and me. I hadn't seen her since our brief confrontation, though text messages about practical matters arrived periodically. Need to schedule time to collect the rest of my clothes. Is Thursday evening okay? Or home insurance bill arrived? Forwarding to your email. Each exchange maintained careful neutrality, neither acknowledging the legal preparations happening in parallel, as her attorney began challenging the validity of our prenuptial agreement through formal letters to Sarah. Jenkins. Standard opening moves, Sarah assured me when forwarding the latest communication. They're claiming the agreement is unconscionable given current circumstances and that you've commingled assets to the point where separation is impractical. Will those arguments work? I asked during our phone consultation. Unlikely. The agreement was properly executed with independent counsel on both sides. As for commingling, we have detailed records of your equity grants and the company's capitalization table clearly showing your founder's shares as separate property protected by the agreement. I trusted Sarah's assessment, but remained unsettled by the increasingly adversarial tone. This wasn't how I'd imagined ending 15 years with Rebecca, through formal legal correspondence and strategic maneuvers. Yet I couldn't see another path forward, given what was at stake. On Thursday evening, as agreed, I made myself scarce while Rebecca collected more of her belongings from our house. I drove to downtown Portland, walking aimlessly through the Pearl District as light rain misted the streets. The city felt both familiar and foreign, like so much else in my life lately. Recognizable outlines filled with altered details. I found myself outside Elevation Fitness, the upscale gym where Rebecca had spent countless hours over the past 2 years, where she had met Ryan. The building's glass facade revealed glimpses of the interior, sleek equipment, mood lighting, beautiful. People engaged in what looked more like performance art than exercise. I stood watching until a figure caught my attention, a tall man in his early 30s with the sculpted physique of someone who made fitness his career. Ryan Matthews. He was demonstrating something to a client, a middle-aged woman watching, his movements with rapt attention. The scene was innocent enough, professional instruction between trainer and client, yet I couldn't help wondering if this was how it had started with Rebecca. Small moments of connection, innocent admiration growing into something more. Ryan glanced up, his eyes meeting mine through the glass. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by visible discomfort. He knew who I was. Of course he did. I'd met him several times, had thanked him for helping Rebecca with her back problems, had even paid for some of those early training sessions. The irony was almost unbearable. I turned away before he could decide whether to acknowledge me, continuing my aimless walk through evening streets. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Finished at the house. Thank you for giving me space. To get my things. I didn't respond. Instead, I found a quiet bar and ordered a double scotch, neat. The bartender, sensing my mood, kept her cheerful banter to a minimum as she placed the amber liquid before me. 2 seats down, a man approximately my age nursed a similar drink, his wedding ring conspicuously absent, but the pale band of skin where it had recently resided telling its own story. We exchanged the brief nod of mutual recognition that men, in similar circumstances, seem to instinctively share, a silent acknowledgement of membership in a club nobody wants to join. "How long?" he asked after several minutes of companionable silence. 15 years, I replied. You? 12. Found. Out last month she's been seeing her chiropractor for over a year. I raised my glass in grim solidarity. Personal trainer. At least they're looking after our wives' health while destroying our marriages. His bitter laugh mirrored my own feelings. Greg, he offered, extending his hand. Jim. We didn't speak much after that, but there was comfort in the shared experience. 2 strangers united by similar wounds, silently acknowledging the peculiar grief of marriages, ending not with dramatic arguments, but with the quiet revelation of parallel lives. I left after 1 drink, not wanting alcohol to fuel decisions I might regret. Driving home, I realized I'd reached a crossroads. I could either allow myself to be consumed by betrayal and resentment, or I could approach this situation with the same strategic clarity I brought to business challenges. The house was exactly as I'd left it, save for the newly empty spaces where Rebecca's belongings had been. I walked through each room, cataloguing the absences. Her dresser now half empty, bathroom shelves cleared of her cosmetics, closet showing. Gaps where her clothes had hung, the physical manifestation of our separation. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the secure folder where I'd begun documenting my suspicions about her relationship with Ryan. It was time to move from suspicion to evidence, from conjecture to proof. Not out of vindictiveness, but out of necessary pragmatism. The Prenup's Infidelity clause represented significant financial protection for everything I'd built at NeuraTech. I couldn't afford to let emotion, whether residual love or fresh anger, cloud my judgment. I began methodically. First, our phone records for the past year, accessible through our shared cellular account that Rebecca had apparently forgotten. To separate. The pattern was immediately evident. Frequent calls to a number I recognized as Ryan's, often late in the evening when I was still at the office or on business trips. Texts numbering in the thousands between them, increasing in frequency over the past 8 months. Next, credit card statements showing charges at hotels in nearby coastal towns on weekends when Rebecca had claimed to be visiting her sister in Seattle. Restaurant bills for 2 at intimate establishments known for their romantic ambience. A jewelry purchase at a boutique known for personalized gifts, dated just before Ryan's birthday. The electronic evidence mounted on my screen, each entry another small betrayal. I compiled it meticulously, organizing everything in a spreadsheet with dates, times, and explanatory notes. This wasn't just about proving infidelity. It was about understanding the timeline, seeing exactly how and when our marriage had unraveled. While I remained oblivious, buried in work and ambition. By midnight, I had assembled a compelling digital case. But something was still missing, direct evidence of the relationship beyond circumstantial financial records. I needed communications, acknowledgements from Rebecca or Ryan directly confirming their affair. I remembered then that Rebecca used our shared Apple account for backups. We'd set it up years ago for convenience, neither of us particularly concerned about privacy from each other. Had she remembered to separate this digital connection when disentangling our lives? I accessed the shared cloud storage and found my answer backup data from her phone, including text message archives. The most recent backup was from just 3 weeks ago, likely automated before she thought to change her settings. I hesitated briefly, a last moment of respect for the privacy of a relationship already irreparably violated. Then I opened the files, searching for exchanges with Ryan. They were all there, hundreds of messages evolving from professional communications about training schedules to personal conversations, and eventually explicit exchanges that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Messages that detailed their plans together, that discussed their feelings, that strategized about how to manage the eventual dissolution of our marriage. "I don't know how to tell him," Rebecca had written 2 months ago. "Every time I try, he's either working or so exhausted I feel guilty, adding more stress. He's made his choice every day for years," Ryan had responded. "You deserve happiness. We deserve a chance. After the Hansen contract is secured," she'd promised. "That's the milestone he's been killing himself for. Once that pressure is off, I'll tell him." The Hansen contract, our largest client acquisition to date, the deal that had consumed 60-hour work weeks for months, the achievement that had finally positioned NeuraTech for potential acquisition. I'd celebrated the signing with the team just 3 weeks ago, opening champagne in the office, while Rebecca texted her congratulations, claiming a client dinner prevented her from joining us. Now I knew she'd been with Ryan that evening, finalizing her exit strategy, while I celebrated what I thought was a step toward our shared future. The messages continued, growing more intimate and detailed, confirming physical encounters at his apartment, at hotels during her fictitious trips to visit her sister, even in our home on days when she knew I'd be working late. Each revelation was another blow, yet I continued reading, needing to understand the full extent of what had happened right under my nose. The final exchange was from the day before Michael had told me about the affair. "He needs to hear it from you," Ryan had written, "not from someone else. You said you'd tell him after Hansen was secured. I will. This weekend, I promise. I just need to figure out the right approach given the prenup situation. What exactly does your prenup say about infidelity? That I forfeit claims to business assets if I'm unfaithful. But after 15 years and everything I've sacrificed for his career, no court would fully enforce that. My lawyer says we have options." I closed the files, a cold clarity settling over me. Rebecca hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been strategizing to circumvent the agreement we'd both willingly signed, planning to claim her share of NeuraTech despite clear contractual terms. The discovery transformed something in me, shifting pain and betrayal into resolved determination. I compiled everything into a comprehensive document: timeline, evidence, communications. By 3 a.m., I had assembled an irrefutable case documenting their relationship over nearly a year. I encrypted the file and sent it to Sarah Jenkins with a brief message: "Evidence for prenup enforcement. Let me know next steps." Then I shut down my computer and went to bed, sleeping soundly for the first time since learning of Rebecca's betrayal. Not because the pain had diminished, but because I'd reclaimed some measure of control amid the chaos. Whatever happened next, I would face it with clear eyes and strategic purpose. The next morning, I received a call from Eric about Apex's acquisition interest. "They want to accelerate the process," he explained, excitement evident in his voice. "They're talking about a formal letter of intent within 2 weeks, not months. This is happening, Jim." What changed? They're concerned about market conditions shifting, want to lock in the deal while their stock price is strong for the equity portion of the offering. I processed this information, thinking through implications for the divorce proceedings. What valuation range are they suggesting? Initial discussions point to around $45 million. Given our cap table, your founder's shares would be worth approximately $22 million, I finished for him, plus potential earn-out provisions. Exactly. Life-changing money, Jim, for both of us. Life-changing indeed, and precisely the kind of asset the prenup's infidelity clause was designed to protect. The timing couldn't have been more significant. Keep me posted on every development, I told Eric, and let's keep this quiet outside the executive team until we have something concrete. Of course. You doing okay with everything else? Managing, I said simply, unwilling to burden our professional relationship with my personal turmoil. Focused on getting the best outcome for the company. After ending the call, I forwarded the acquisition update to Sarah, adding context about timing and potential valuation. Her response came within the hour, evidence received and reviewed. Very compelling case for enforcing the infidelity clause. Suggest we schedule settlement conference next week, given acquisition developments. Stronger position to negotiate from strength. I agreed with her assessment, replying, proceed with conference request. I want this resolved before acquisition discussions advance further. The pieces were falling into place. Legal evidence secured, acquisition timeline accelerating, strategic position strengthening. Yet beneath the tactical maneuvering, a hollowness persisted. All the professional success, all the potential financial windfall couldn't fill the void left by 15 years of shared history unraveling. That evening, I found myself driving to my father's house in Lake Oswego, seeking perspective from the man whose own divorce had shaped his approach to relationships and legal protections. He answered the door himself, moving more slowly than I remembered, the recent health scares evident in his careful movements. Didn't expect to see you, he said, leading me to his study where a glass of bourbon already awaited him. He poured me one without asking, the silent understanding between us that this visit required fortification. Got the evidence for the prenup, I explained after taking a seat. Affair's been going on almost a year. She was planning to challenge the infidelity clause despite clear violations. My father nodded, processing this information with the detached analysis of someone who'd represented hundreds of divorcing couples throughout his legal career. Not surprising. Nobody believes consequences apply to them until they do. Acquisition. Talks are accelerating too. Could be looking at significant liquidity event within months. Good timing, he observed. Gives you leverage. I swirled the bourbon in my glass, watching amber liquid catch the light. Does it get easier, moving forward after something like this? My father's expression softened slightly, revealing the man beneath the attorney. Different, not easier. You build a new normal, focus on what you can control. That's what I'm doing, I assured him, being strategic, protecting what I've built. I meant after the legal battle, he clarified. The money, the company, those are important, but they're not everything. Coming from a man who'd thrown himself into work after my mother's departure, rarely dating and never remarrying, the advice carried particular weight. My father had protected his assets, but had perhaps lost something else in the process, the capacity for vulnerability, for new connections. I don't know if I could trust anyone again, I admitted. Not after this. You will, eventually, but you'll be smarter about it. He took a slow sip of bourbon. The prenup did its job, protected what needed protecting when emotions couldn't be trusted. Remember that success when you're questioning everything else. We sat in companionable silence after that, two men shaped by similar betrayals generations, apart, each finding our own path through the aftermath. Before leaving, I thanked him for his insistence on the infidelity clause 15 years earlier, foresight that would now preserve what I'd worked so hard to build. I wish I'd been wrong, he said at the door, surprising me with a brief hug, but I'm glad you were prepared. As I drove home, I realized that's exactly what I needed to be now. Prepared. Not just legally, but emotionally and practically for whatever came next. A life I hadn't planned for, hadn't wanted, but now needed to navigate with the same strategic clarity I brought to business challenges. Tomorrow, I would meet with Sarah to prepare for the settlement conference. The day after, I would review Apex's preliminary acquisition framework with Eric and our board. Life was continuing, evolving, demanding my presence and attention despite personal turmoil. I had evidence, I had leverage, I had clarity about the path forward. That would have to be enough for now. The rest, the hollow spaces, the broken trust, the questions about what came next, would have to wait until the immediate business of untangling 15 years was complete. The morning after my confrontation with Rebecca, I woke early, my mind already churning with calculations and contingency plans. Sleep had been fitful at best. Fragments of rest interrupted by replaying conversations, reassessing memories, and recalibrating my understanding of the past 2 years. I showered, dressed in one of my better suits, and headed to the office before most of Portland had their first cup of coffee. NeuraTech occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated industrial building in the Pearl District. I'd always appreciated the juxtaposition, cutting-edge predictive algorithms housed in a structure that had once manufactured paper products a century ago. Adaptation and evolution wrapped in historical context. This morning, the symbolism felt particularly relevant. The office was empty when I arrived, the silence a welcome reprieve from both the turmoil at home and the usual buzz of developers and sales teams. I made coffee in our small kitchen, carried it to my glass-walled office, and began methodically organizing my approach to the situation with the same structured precision I'd apply to any complex system problem. First, I needed to understand my position clearly, not just emotionally, but legally and financially. I pulled up our company's capitalization table, reviewing my equity position. 49% ownership as co-founder, currently valued at approximately $19.6 million based on our last funding round's valuation. That figure would likely increase significantly if the whispered acquisition discussions materialized. Next, I reviewed our prenuptial agreement again, reading each provision carefully now that its theoretical protections had become painfully relevant. The infidelity clause was unambiguous. In the event that either party engages in sexual relations outside the marriage during its term, said party shall forfeit all claims to business interests, intellectual property, and equity holdings developed or acquired by the other party during the marriage. When we'd signed it, NeuraTech hadn't existed. Rebecca had been building her career as a marketing consultant, while I transitioned from military software development to civilian projects. The clause had seemed like an archaic formality, something my father insisted upon after his own painful divorce, not something we'd ever need to invoke. At 7:30 a.m., I called Sarah Jenkins, leaving a voicemail requesting an urgent consultation. By 8:15, she'd responded with a text, "Can see you at 10 Shu, my office. Bring the prenup and any evidence you have regarding infidelity." Evidence, that was the critical component. I knew about the affair now, but suspicion wouldn't be enough to enforce the prenuptial provisions. I needed documentation, proof that would stand up to legal scrutiny if Rebecca contested the terms. The office began filling with employees around 8:30. I nodded greetings, but remained behind my glass walls, a transparency that now felt ironic given how opaque my personal life had become. Eric arrived at 9 Sao, stopping by my office with concerned eyes. "You're here early," he observed. "Thought you were taking time off." "Change of plans," I replied, gesturing for him to close the door. Once he did, I gave him the condensed version: Rebecca's affair, the prenup's infidelity clause, and the potential implications for my NeuraTech equity. Eric listened without interruption, his expression shifting from shock to strategic calculation. As my co-founder and the company's CEO, he understood immediately what was at stake. "How solid is the prenup?" he asked when I finished. "About to find out. Meeting with my lawyer at 10. He nodded, running a hand through his prematurely graying hair. The timing with these acquisition talks, it's concerning. If Rebecca contests the prenup, it could complicate things for potential buyers. They'll want clean ownership structures without pending litigation. I know. That's why I need to resolve this quickly and decisively. Do you need me to do anything? Eric's loyalty had never been in question during our years building NeuraTech. From late-night coding sessions in my garage to navigating our first enterprise clients, he'd been a steady presence through every challenge. Just keep the acquisition discussions moving forward while maintaining confidentiality. The fewer people who know about either situation, the better. Consider it done. He rose to leave, then paused. I'm sorry about Rebecca, Jim. Truly. Whatever you need, professionally or personally, I'm here. I thanked him, gathering my documents for the meeting with Sarah. As I left the office, I noticed 3 missed calls from Rebecca on my phone. No voicemails, no texts, just the notification of attempts to reach me. I didn't return the calls. Sarah Jenkins's law firm occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise with views of the Willamette River and Mount Hood on clear days. Today, low clouds obscured the mountain, the river a steel-grey ribbon below, reflecting the Portland skyline. Her assistant showed me to a conference room where Sarah was already waiting, reviewing documents. She rose when I entered, extending her hand. At 45, Sarah had built a reputation as one of Portland's premier divorce attorneys, specializing in high-net-worth cases and complex asset protection. Her father had been my father's law partner decades earlier, creating a connection that had led me to trust her with our prenuptial agreement 15 years ago. Jim, she said, her handshake firm, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. So do I replied, taking a seat across from her. Thank you for seeing me on short notice. Your father called ahead. He mentioned the situation. She tapped the folder before her. I've pulled your prenuptial agreement from our archives. Let's start by reviewing what we're working with. For the next hour, we dissected the document paragraph by paragraph. Sarah explained the strengths and vulnerabilities of each provision, particularly focusing on the infidelity clause. This is robustly worded, she noted, clearly defined triggers, specific consequences mutually applicable to both parties. The separate representation during execution strengthens its enforceability. Rebecca had her own counsel review it, correct? Yes, her family's attorney. Good. That helps counter any claim of coercion or lack of understanding. She made a note. Now, about evidence of infidelity, what do you have so far? I described my conversation with Michael and Rebecca's subsequent confirmation of the affair with Ryan. Verbal admissions, but nothing documented yet. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Admissions help, but we'll need more. Text messages, emails, financial records showing patterns consistent with an affair, hotel charges, gifts, unusual expenses. The more comprehensive the documentation, the stronger our position. How do I get that without crossing legal or ethical lines? I asked. I don't want to hack her accounts or hire private investigators to follow her. Start with what you legally have access to: joint accounts, shared cloud storage, family phone plans. If you're still on shared services, you may have legitimate access to communication records or location data. Document everything meticulously, including dates and times of access, to show you weren't being deliberately intrusive. The conversation shifted to strategy. How to approach the divorce proceedings, when to formally serve papers, whether to attempt settlement negotiations before litigation. Sarah's methodical approach mirrored my own, breaking down complex emotional situations into manageable legal components. The acquisition talks complicate matters, she acknowledged, when I explained the potential valuation impact. Rebecca's attorney will certainly argue that the impending increase in your equity value should be considered marital property, since the groundwork was laid during the marriage. even with the infidelity clause? They'll try to challenge the clause itself before addressing the acquisition. We need to be prepared for arguments about unconscionability, especially given the potential dollar values involved. I left Sarah's office with a clear action plan: gather evidence, document timeline, prepare financial disclosures, and maintain confidentiality about acquisition discussions. The path forward was demanding but defined, a welcome contrast to the emotional chaos of the preceding days. Rather than returning to NeuraTech, I drove to a small cafe in a neighborhood far from our usual haunts. I needed neutral space to begin the evidence gathering Sarah had outlined. Opening my laptop, I started with our joint financial records: credit card statements, bank accounts, investment portfolios. The patterns emerged quickly once I knew what to look for. Weekends when Rebecca had claimed to be visiting her sister in Seattle coincided with charges at coastal Oregon hotels and restaurants. Training sessions with Ryan had expanded from our home to private studio rentals, often scheduled during times I was committed to investor meetings or client calls. A jewelry purchase at an upscale boutique aligned with what I now recognized as Ryan's birthday. None of these alone proved infidelity, but together they created a compelling circumstantial case. I organized everything into a spreadsheet, noting dates, amounts, and relevant context. The systematic approach helped me maintain emotional distance, treating this as an analytical problem rather than the dissolution of 15 years of shared life. My phone vibrated with a text from Rebecca. "We need to talk about what happens next. Available tonight." I considered ignoring it, continuing my methodical information gathering without distraction. But Sarah had emphasized the importance of appearing reasonable throughout the process. I responded, "Not tonight, still processing. We'll be in touch soon to discuss arrangements." Her reply came quickly, "Jim, please don't shut down. This doesn't have to be adversarial." The irony of her concern about adversarial proceedings while she'd been systematically preparing her exit for months wasn't lost on me. I didn't respond. Instead, I continued my digital archaeology, excavating our shared history for evidence of its undoing. By late afternoon, I had compiled a substantial record of suspicious patterns and unexplained expenditures. What I still lacked was definitive proof, communications or documentation that explicitly confirmed the affair. I considered our digital entanglements. Like many long-married couples, Rebecca and I had accumulated shared accounts, passwords, and access points throughout our relationship. Our Amazon account, Netflix subscription, cloud storage, all created with the assumption of permanent partnership, the digital infrastructure of a unified life. The cloud storage. We'd set up automatic phone backups years ago, linked to a shared account I'd created with my Apple ID. Had Rebecca remembered to disconnect her devices from this digital tether? I logged in from my laptop, navigating to the backup section. There it was, Rebecca's phone backup from just 3 weeks earlier. An automatic upload she had likely forgotten to disable in her methodical exit planning. I hesitated before opening it, confronting an ethical boundary. This was technically information I had legal access to, but it felt invasive nonetheless. The moment of doubt passed as I remembered Rebecca's words. This doesn't have to be adversarial. She had chosen the adversarial path months ago when she began her relationship with Ryan while methodically separating our finances. She had stripped me of the opportunity to address our marital problems directly, to choose whether to fight for our relationship or end it cleanly. Now I needed to protect what remained, the company I'd built and the future it represented. I opened the backup files, navigating to her message history. The exchanges with Ryan began professionally enough, scheduling sessions, discussing fitness, goals, sharing nutritional advice. But around 10 months earlier, the tone shifted subtly. Personal details crept in. Inside jokes developed. Schedule coordination expanded beyond workout times to evening availability and weekend plans. 8 months ago, the first explicit messages appeared. Arrangements for meetings at his apartment. References to physical encounters that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Discussions about their future together once she left me. Most devastating were the messages from 6 months earlier, when Rebecca and Ryan began strategizing about the timing of her departure. "Need to be smart about this," she had written. "There's a prenup with an infidelity clause. If he can prove anything before I leave, it affects what I can claim from NeuraTech." "How much are we talking about?" Ryan had asked. "Potentially millions if they get acquired, which seems increasingly likely." The calculated nature of their planning hit me harder than the infidelity itself. This wasn't just passion overriding judgment, it was deliberate strategy. They had weighed the financial implications, timed their actions to maximize her potential claims, and worked to conceal evidence that would trigger the prenup's protections. I downloaded the relevant messages, saved them to an encrypted file, and closed the backup. Evidence secured, I now had what Sarah needed to enforce the infidelity clause. The legal path forward was clear, but the emotional landscape remained treacherous. As evening settled over Portland, I found myself driving past our house, my house now, without consciously deciding to return there. Rebecca's car wasn't in the driveway. I wondered idly where she was staying. With Ryan? With friends? In some short-term rental while she planned her next move? Inside, the house felt cavernous. We'd purchased it 3 years earlier, celebrating NeuraTech's first major funding round with a home that reflected our arrival in a new financial bracket. The renovated Craftsman in Eastmoreland had seemed perfect then. Historic character updated. With modern conveniences, a home office for each of us, space for the family we still thought we might have someday. Now it felt like an elaborate stage set, the backdrop for a play that had unexpectedly closed. I wandered through rooms filled with carefully selected furniture and artwork that had once represented our shared aesthetic, but now felt like artifacts of a discontinued identity. In the kitchen, I opened a bottle of wine, then reconsidered and chose water instead. I needed clarity, not numbing. Sitting at our dining table, a handcrafted piece we'd commissioned from a local woodworker to celebrate. "Our 10th anniversary," I called my father. "I have the evidence," I said when he answered. "Messages confirming everything. They've been planning this for months." My father was silent for a moment. Then, "Are you certain you want to see this through? Once you use that evidence, there's no going back to negotiation or amicable separation." The question surprised me. My father had always been the pragmatist, the one who had insisted on the prenup's protections in the first place. "You're the one who told me to protect my assets. That's what I'm doing." "I know." His voice softened slightly. "I'm also the one who knows what it's like to live with the aftermath of a contentious divorce. The money matters, Jim. Of course it does. But so does your peace of mind going forward. What are you suggesting? That I ignore what they've done? Let Rebecca claim half of NeuraTech after she's spent months deliberately hiding her affair to circumvent the prenup? No. His response was measured. "I'm suggesting you consider what victory looks like beyond the financial outcome. Sometimes winning costs more than losing." I recognized the wisdom in his words, even as I bristled at the implication that I might be acting from vengeance rather than self-protection. "I'm not trying to punish her, Dad. I just won't let her disregard an agreement we both entered willingly, especially when she's been so calculating about it." "Fair enough," he conceded. "Just be sure you're making decisions your future self can live with." After we hung up, I sat with his advice, examining my motives honestly. Was I acting from wounded pride, from a desire to make Rebecca pay for her betrayal, perhaps partially, But the core issue remained. She had made deliberate choices that violated our agreement, choices specifically timed to maximize her financial benefit at my expense. Enforcing the prenup wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences for calculated actions, about honoring the commitments we'd both made when we entered our marriage, about protecting what I'd built through years of 80-hour work weeks and missed vacations. I sent Sarah an encrypted file containing the evidence I'd gathered, along with a brief message. Let me know next steps after reviewing this. Her response came the following morning. Evidence reviewed. Very strong position for enforcing infidelity clause. Suggest we begin formal proceedings. Can you come in today to discuss strategy? I confirmed the appointment, then turned my attention to NeuraTech. The company had become my refuge, a realm where systems behaved predictably, where problems had solutions, where effort produced measurable results. I threw myself into work with renewed focus, addressing development bottlenecks and refining our acquisition positioning. Eric noticed the shift in my intensity. You seem different, he observed during our afternoon strategy session. More focused. Clarity helps, I replied, knowing exactly what I'm fighting for. He nodded, understanding without needing elaboration. The Apex Technologies team requested another call. They're accelerating their due diligence timeline. Could mean a formal offer sooner than we anticipated. Good. Keep them engaged while maintaining our leverage. I pulled up our product roadmap on the conference room screen. Let's review what capabilities we should highlight versus what we keep proprietary until later discussions. We spent the next 2 hours deep in acquisition strategy, positioning NeuraTech for maximum valuation while ensuring our core team would remain intact through any transition. This was what I excelled at: strategic planning, anticipating contingencies, optimizing outcomes. When I checked my phone afterward, I found 3 missed calls from Rebecca and a text, "Please call me." My attorney says she received communication from Sarah Jenkins. I'd rather discuss this directly than through lawyers. I forwarded the message to Sarah before responding to Rebecca. All communication should go through our attorneys now. Sarah has my complete confidence to represent my interests. Her reply was immediate. Is that really how you want to do this? 15 years ends with legal maneuvers and no real conversation? The message struck a nerve. 15 years, reduced to evidence files and legal strategy. But Rebecca had made that choice long before I had, planning her exit while maintaining our marital facade. Still, something in me hesitated to close the door completely on direct communication. I called Sarah first. Rebecca wants to talk directly rather than through attorneys. Your thoughts? Risky, Sarah answered without hesitation. Anything you say could be used in negotiations. Emotions are still raw, which makes unfiltered conversation dangerous from a legal standpoint. What if we've already secured enough evidence to enforce the prenup? Does it matter what I say to her now? Sarah's silence conveyed her professional disapproval. Technically, we have a strong position with the evidence gathered, but divorce proceedings rarely follow straight lines. New arguments emerge. Judges make unexpected rulings. The cleanest approach is to maintain attorney communication only. Noted, I said, but I may need closure beyond legal resolution. If you do speak with her, document everything immediately afterward and avoid any discussion of settlement terms or asset division. That remains exclusively in our domain. After ending the call with Sarah, I texted Rebecca, "We can meet tomorrow. Coffee at Proud Mary's at 10 a.m. just to talk, not to negotiate terms." She responded immediately, "I'll be there. Thank you, Jim." That night, I reviewed the evidence file one more time, ensuring I understood exactly what Rebecca and Ryan had discussed and planned. The messages revealed not just their relationship, but their strategic approach to ending my marriage with maximum financial benefit. I needed to remember this calculated aspect when facing Rebecca tomorrow, to separate any lingering emotional attachment from the reality of her actions. I arrived at Proud Mary's 15 minutes early the next morning, choosing a table in the corner that offered some privacy without complete isolation. The coffee shop hummed with typical Portland energy: creative professionals with laptops, young parents with expensive strollers, baristas calling out elaborate coffee orders with practiced efficiency. Rebecca arrived precisely at 10, dressed in a casual elegance that reminded me of our early dating years. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face showing the strain of recent events despite careful makeup. For a brief moment, seeing her in this familiar context, I felt the ghost of our shared past. Thousands of mornings across breakfast tables, countless conversations about dreams and plans, the accumulated intimacy of 15 years. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, setting down her bag and ordering a latte from the approaching server. "You wanted to talk outside of legal channels," I replied. "Here we are." She studied my face, perhaps searching for openings in my composed exterior. "This is so formal, so cold, after everything we've been through together." "What did you expect, Rebecca? Warmth and understanding after discovering you've been having an affair while systematically preparing to leave?" "Me? After finding messages where you and Ryan strategized about how to time your exit to maximize what you could take from NeuraTech." Her expression faltered slightly. "You found our messages?" "Yes. That was private communication, Jim. You had no right." "I had every legal right to access information from accounts I own and pay for," I interrupted, keeping my voice low despite my rising anger. "Accounts you conveniently forgot to disconnect from when separating everything else in your meticulously planned exit." Her latte arrived, creating a momentary pause in our confrontation. She wrapped her hands around the mug but didn't drink. "I never meant to hurt you," she finally said. "The messages probably sound worse than the reality." "Do they? I need to be smart about this. There's a prenup with an infidelity clause. If he can prove anything before I leave, it affects what I can claim from NeuraTech." "Your exact words." "Rebecca, not exactly ambiguous." Color rose in her cheeks. "That was Ryan pushing for details. He doesn't understand how these things work." "And yet you explained it perfectly, laid out exactly how timing your departure could affect your claim to my company. The company I built while you were developing your relationship with Ryan. The company we supported together," she countered, her voice strengthening. "I put my career on hold during those early years. I managed our entire life while you worked. Impossible hours. I earned a stake in NeuraTech's success." "You did," I acknowledged. "And if you'd chosen to end our marriage honestly, if you'd come to me and said you were unhappy, that you wanted out, we could have negotiated fair terms regardless of the prenup. I would have recognized your contributions and found an equitable solution." "Would you?" Skepticism edged her words. "When was the last time you prioritized anything above NeuraTech? When was the last time you even noticed I was unhappy?" The question hit harder than I wanted to admit. Had I been so absorbed in building the company that I'd missed the dissolution of my marriage? Had my neglect created the conditions for her betrayal? "My focus on NeuraTech doesn't justify your actions," I said finally. "You had choices, Rebecca. You could have demanded my attention, could have tried therapy, could have given me an ultimatum. Instead, you chose deception. You chose Ryan." She looked down at her untouched latte. "It wasn't that simple." "It never is," I agreed. "But here we are. You wanted to talk directly instead of through attorneys. What exactly did you hope to accomplish with this conversation?" Rebecca took a deep breath, meeting my eyes again. "I wanted to see if there was any chance we could handle this without destroying each other." without letting lawyers turn 15 years into nothing but assets to be divided and grievances to be litigated. That chance existed before I found your messages with Ryan, before I discovered how deliberately you've been planning this, timing it around NeuraTech's potential acquisition. Her eyes widened slightly. The acquisition talks are advancing, yes, and you would have known that if we were still partners in any meaningful sense. Instead, you were partners with Ryan, strategizing about how to extract maximum value from the company I've sacrificed everything to build. Not everything, Jim, she said quietly. You sacrificed our marriage to build NeuraTech. Let's at least be honest about that. The statement landed with uncomfortable precision. Had I sacrificed our marriage on the altar of my ambition? Perhaps. But that didn't justify her response. Maybe you're right, I conceded. Maybe I bear responsibility for neglecting our relationship. But you bear responsibility for your choices too, for the affair, for the deception, for the calculated timing. The prenup exists precisely for this scenario, where trust has been irreparably broken. So that's it, she asked. You'll enforce the infidelity clause and cut me out completely after 15 years together. Not completely. The clause only affects business assets and intellectual property. You'll still receive your fair share of our personal property, retirement accounts, and the house if you want it. She laughed humorlessly. That's generous. I get the furniture while you walk away with millions from the acquisition. Those were the terms we agreed to, Rebecca. Terms designed specifically to protect business interests in case of infidelity. Your attorney reviewed them. You signed. Willingly. 15 years ago when we had nothing, when it was all theoretical. Principles aren't theoretical, I replied. They're either upheld or they're not. You chose not to uphold the commitments we made to each other. Now you face the consequences outlined in an agreement we both entered knowingly. Rebecca was silent for a long moment, perhaps recognizing the immovability of my position. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from confrontational to resigned. I underestimated you, she said. I thought you'd be too focused on NeuraTech to notice what was happening, too absorbed in code and clients to pay attention to bank statements and travel itineraries. You were right about that for too long, I acknowledged. But even oblivious workaholics eventually notice when their entire personal life has been hollowed out. We sat in silence, the bustle of the coffee shop continuing around us, life proceeding normally while our world reconfigured itself. Finally, Rebecca gathered her bag. I'll tell my attorney to continue discussions with Sarah, she said, but Jim, think carefully about what winning looks like in this situation. There are some victories that leave you with nothing but the prize. As she walked away, my father's similar warning echoed in my mind. Two people who had known me intimately, my wife and my father, both cautioning me about the cost of the path I was choosing, yet neither of them offered an alternative that didn't require me to simply accept Rebecca's betrayal without consequence. I finished my coffee, watching Portland's morning unfold through the cafe window. Tech workers hurried toward downtown offices. Parents walked children to nearby schools. Tourists consulted maps on their phones, lives intersecting briefly before continuing along their separate trajectories. Rebecca and I had reached our divergence point. Whatever came next, the legal proceedings, the asset division, the acquisition negotiations, would happen along parallel but separate paths. The intimacy of shared purpose had ended long before this coffee shop conversation, perhaps years earlier than I'd been willing to acknowledge. I texted Sarah, met with Rebecca as planned. She'll have her attorney contact you to continue formal discussions. Proceed with enforcing the prenuptial agreement. Her response was immediate and professional. Understood. We'll prepare necessary filings based on evidence provided. Keep me informed of any developments with acquisition discussions. Two paths forward, now clearly defined. Securing NeuraTech's future through successful acquisition and protecting my stake in that future through legal enforcement of agreements made years earlier. Both required the same skills: strategic thinking, attention to detail, persistence through complexity. I left the coffee shop and walked to my car, feeling neither victorious nor defeated. Just clear-eyed about what came next, about what I was fighting for and why. The prenup would do what it was designed to do: protect business assets when personal relationships failed. The rest, the emotional aftermath, the reconfiguration of identity, the questions about what came next, would have to wait until the immediate battle was won. 3 weeks after my coffee shop conversation with Rebecca, I sat in Sarah Jenkins' conference room reviewing the final settlement proposal. The large windows offered a panoramic view of Portland's skyline, the city sprawling beneath clouds that threatened rain but hadn't yet delivered. It felt appropriate somehow, potential consequences gathering but still suspended. Their counteroffer accepts most of our terms, Sarah explained, sliding the document across the polished table. Rebecca relinquishes all claims to NeuraTech, equity and intellectual property in accordance with the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause. In exchange, she wants to keep the house by buying out your share at a valuation 10% below market. I skimmed the document, noting the careful legal language that transformed 15 years of marriage into assets and liabilities to be divided. What's your assessment? It's reasonable, Sarah admitted. The house concession is minor compared to what she's forfeiting with NeuraTech. The prenup evidence was too strong for her attorney to fight effectively. This represents an acknowledgement of that reality. I nodded, running my finger along the edge of the paper. Any surprises or hidden traps I should be aware of? Nothing. Significant, standard non-disparagement clauses, confidentiality provisions regarding the terms of settlement, the usual framework for high-net-worth divorces. Sarah leaned forward slightly. It's a good outcome, Jim. Clean, definitive, protective of your business interests, exactly what we aimed for. She was right, of course. The settlement accomplished. Precisely what I'd set out to achieve, enforcing the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause to protect my ownership stake in NeuraTech. Yet the victory felt hollow, devoid of the satisfaction I'd anticipated when first discovering Rebecca's betrayal. How long until this is finalized? I asked, signing the document where Sarah indicated. We can file today. Given the uncontested nature and prenuptial agreement, the court should process it quickly. Likely within 6 to 8 weeks you'll be legally divorced. 6 to 8 weeks to formally end a 15-year marriage. The timeline seemed simultaneously too fast and infinitely too long. What about the NeuraTech acquisition? Any potential complications given the pending divorce? Sarah shook her head. This settlement removes those concerns. With Rebecca explicitly relinquishing all claims to company equity, the ownership structure remains clean for acquisition purposes. The prenup did exactly what it was designed to do. As I left Sarah's office, rain finally began falling. Light at first, then intensifying as I walked to my car. Portland rain, persistent and inevitable, washing everything clean, or at least creating the illusion of cleanliness. I drove to NeuraTech, where another meeting awaited, another pivotal moment in the parallel track of my professional life. Eric and our CFO, Melissa Chen, were already in the conference room with our lead counsel when I arrived. On the speakerphone, representatives from Apex Technologies waited for our response to their formal acquisition offer, delivered yesterday after weeks of accelerated due diligence. "Jim's here," Eric announced, nodding for me to take my seat at the head of the table. "We can proceed with our response." For the next 2 hours, we negotiated final terms, purchase price, earn-out provisions, employee retention packages, integration timelines. The dance of corporate acquisition, precise and choreographed, with billions in shareholder value depending on the exact language chosen. "We can accept the $54 million valuation," I stated, after careful consideration of their latest offer, with the adjusted earn-out structure and expanded retention packages for our core engineering team. The Apex representatives conferred briefly offline before their lead negotiator responded, "That's acceptable. We'll revise the documents accordingly and circulate final versions by end of day." Simple words that crystallized years of work into defined value. NeuraTech, the company that had consumed my waking hours and many sleeping ones, would soon become a division of Apex Technologies. My founding stake would convert to approximately $26, $5 million, half in cash, half in Apex, stuck with a structured vesting schedule. As the call ended, Eric extended his hand. "Congratulations, partner. We did it." I shook his hand, the moment surreal in its significance. "We did, though it doesn't quite feel real yet." "It will when the wire transfers hit," Melissa quipped, her financial pragmatism a constant throughout our growth journey. "The team deserves this outcome, especially you two, the sacrifices you've made to get here." Her voice trailed off, perhaps remembering that one of those sacrifices had become painfully apparent in recent weeks. My divorce wasn't public, knowledge within the company, but the executive team knew the broad outlines. "Speaking of which," Eric said carefully, "how are things proceeding with your personal situation?" "Finalized the settlement today," I replied. "Rebecca accepted the prenup terms. She keeps the house. I keep my NeuraTech equity. Clean break." Eric nodded, relief evident in his expression. The acquisition might have been complicated by contentious divorce proceedings or challenges to my ownership stake. That potential obstacle had now been removed. "What will you do after the transition period?" Melissa asked, changing the subject with characteristic directness. 6 months at Apex, then what? Early retirement? New venture? It was a question I'd been avoiding, focusing instead on immediate challenges rather than the amorphous future beyond Apex's 6-month integration plan. What would I do when I no longer had NeuraTech as my primary purpose, when the daily problems of scaling, competing, and innovating belong to someone else? "Haven't decided," I admitted. "Taking some time to reassess seems prudent." Later. That evening, I found myself driving past Rebecca's house without conscious intention. The lights were on, soft illumination behind familiar windows. I wondered if she was alone, or if Ryan had already moved in, their new life together beginning in the space where our marriage had ended. I didn't stop, continuing instead to a small whiskey bar downtown where I'd occasionally met clients in NeuraTech's early days. The place was half empty on a Tuesday evening, allowing me to claim a corner booth away from other patrons. I ordered 18-year Macallan, a splurge that seemed appropriate given the day's developments. As I savored the first sip, my phone vibrated with a text from my father. Sarah called, said settlement finalized. "You okay?" I appreciated his concern, the simple acknowledgement that legal resolution didn't equate to emotional closure. "I'm okay," had shaken, having a celebratory scotch, or maybe a commemorative one, not sure which. His response came quickly. "On my way." 20 minutes later, he slid into the booth across from me, ordering the same scotch when the server approached. My father looked older than I remembered, the recent health scares evident in his slightly stooped posture and the new lines around his eyes. Yet his gaze remained sharp, assessing. "To clean endings," he said, raising his glass when it arrived. "And unknown beginnings," I added, completing our toast. We drank in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. Sarah says you got everything we aimed for. Prenup enforced, NeuraTech equity protected. Yes, and the acquisition closed today as well. $54 million valuation. My share works out to about 26 scores. $5 million between cash and Apex stock. He nodded appreciatively. Quite a day. Ending one chapter and starting another, all within hours. That's one way to look at it. I turned the crystal glass slowly, watching light refract through amber liquid. Though it feels less like starting something new and more like everything stopping simultaneously. My father studied me with the careful attention he'd once reserved for complex legal briefs. The settlement and acquisition were targets, not destinations. Now you need to figure out where you're actually trying to go. The observation hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. For years, I'd defined success narrowly. Building NeuraTech, creating enterprise value, achieving financial security. Those goals had provided clarity and purpose, metrics against which to measure progress. With those objectives now achieved, the path forward seemed suddenly undefined. Did you ever regret enforcing your prenup with Mom? I asked, the question emerging unbidden from thoughts I'd been circling for weeks. He considered this carefully before answering. Regret the enforcement? No, it was the right financial decision given the circumstances, but I regret letting the legal victory become my entire focus. I protected the assets, but lost perspective on what they were meant for. What do you mean? The money, the property, they were supposed to be tools for building a life, not substitutes for one. He took another sip of scotch. After your mother left, I threw myself into work, into accumulating more, as if that would somehow validate my choices. Took me years to realize I was answering the wrong question. And what was the right question? Not how do I win this divorce, but what kind of life do I want to create now? Not how do I protect what I've built, but what am I building? And toward? He smiled slightly, questions I'm still working on, frankly. We finished our drinks in thoughtful silence, the bar gradually filling around us as Portland's evening crowd arrived. Before leaving, my father clasped my shoulder briefly, a rare physical gesture from a man who had always maintained emotional formality. Don't make my mistakes, he said simply. The prenup did its job. Now figure out what you want the rest of your life to do. I drove home to my temporary apartment, a furnished rental I'd found after leaving the house to Rebecca. The space was functional but impersonal. Modern furniture I hadn't chosen, neutral decor that offended no one and pleased no one either. It suited my transitional state, this limbo between married and divorced, between entrepreneur and acquisition asset. The following morning I woke early and went for a run along the Willamette River. Physical exertion had become my primary coping mechanism over the past months, the simplicity of movement and breath providing temporary clarity amid emotional complexity. As I followed the riverside path, watching the city awaken around me, my father's questions echoed in my mind. What kind of life did I want to create now? What was I building toward? For so long, NeuraTech had provided automatic answers. Building the company had been both means and end, justifying missed holidays, neglected relationships, and personal sacrifices that had ultimately included my marriage. Now that singular focus was gone, revealing the narrowness of the identity I'd constructed around it, I showered and dressed for the office, where the acquisition transition had begun in earnest. Apex had dispatched an integration team, efficient young consultants with identical laptops and seamless coordination. They moved through NeuraTech's operations like a well-practiced surgical team, identifying systems to preserve, modify, or replace. Eric caught me in the hallway outside my office, his expression uncharacteristically tentative. Got a minute to talk? Privately? I nodded, leading him into my office and closing the door. What's up? Apex offered me the division leadership role, he said without preamble, running NeuraTech's integration and expansion within their enterprise architecture. 3-year contract with significant performance incentives. That's excellent news, I replied, genuinely pleased. Eric had been the operational backbone of NeuraTech from the beginning, translating my technical vision into scalable systems and processes. Are you taking it? I wanted to discuss it with you first. We've been partners from day one. Feels strange to continue without you. The company was always going to outgrow us eventually, I pointed out. That was the goal, building something sustainable beyond the founders. Apex is just accelerating that natural evolution. Eric nodded slowly. So you're definitely not staying beyond the 6-month transition? I haven't decided, I admitted. But running a division within a larger corporate structure isn't what I built NeuraTech for. Your skills are better suited to that role than mine. What will you do instead? The question everyone seemed to be asking lately. What would Jim Wilson do without NeuraTech, without Rebecca, without the dual identities of founder and husband that had defined him for 15 years? Taking some time to figure that out, I said, the answer becoming my standard response. After the transition, maybe some travel. Clear my head before the next chapter. Eric seemed to accept this, though concern lingered in his expression. Just don't disappear completely. Whatever you decide to do next, I want to hear about it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of transition meetings and documentation reviews. By evening, mental fatigue had set in, the cumulative effect of navigating professional change while still processing personal upheaval. Instead of returning to my sterile apartment, I drove to Forest Park, hiking the Wildwood Trail until sweat soaked through my shirt despite the October chill. The physical exertion cleared my head enough to acknowledge what I'd been avoiding. Whatever came next, it needed to be different. Not just a new company or project, but a fundamentally different approach to work, to relationships, to measuring success. The patterns that had built NeuraTech had also destroyed my marriage. Replicating them would only lead to similar outcomes, regardless of the specific venture. My phone vibrated with a text as I returned to my car. Rebecca. Papers were filed. Today, according to my attorney. Thought you should know. I stared at the message, the first direct communication we'd had since our coffee shop conversation 3 weeks earlier. Simple words conveying the formal beginning of our marriage's end. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Thank you for letting me know." Her reply came quickly. "Movers are coming for your remaining items at the house this weekend. Is Saturday morning convenient? Or would you prefer they come when I'm not there?" The consideration surprised me, an unexpected grace note amid the legal formalities. "Saturday is fine. I'll come personally for a few specific items if that's okay. Should only take an hour. That works. 10 a.m., I'll be there." The brief exchange left me unsettled, a reminder that divorce, like marriage, required ongoing negotiation and communication. The legal framework might be established, but the human elements continued evolving, finding new equilibrium in separated lives. Saturday morning arrived with typical Pacific Northwest indecision, neither fully raining nor completely dry, the sky a uniform gray that threatened without committing. I drove to the house, arriving at precisely 10 a.m. Rebecca's car was in the driveway, alongside an unfamiliar SUV that I assumed belonged to Ryan. The thought of him being inside what had once been our home sent an unexpected surge of anger through me, not jealousy exactly, but territorial indignation. I sat in my car for several minutes, composing myself before approaching the front door. Before I could knock, Rebecca opened it, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater I didn't recognize. "Jim," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Come in. The movers called. They're running about 20 minutes late." I followed her inside, immediately noting changes to the space. Furniture rearranged, New artwork on walls, different throw pillows on the couch, small modifications that collectively transformed what had been our shared aesthetic into something distinctly hers. "You've redecorated," I observed, keeping my tone conversational rather than accusatory. "Just a few changes, needed it to feel different." She gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee? I just made a fresh pot." The normalcy of the offer felt surreal, given our circumstances, yet I found myself nodding. "Sure, black is fine." She disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with 2 mugs. I recognized mine, a handmade ceramic piece we'd purchased from a local artist at the Saturday market years earlier, a small detail she'd preserved amid the broader changes. "Your office is untouched," she said, handing me the coffee. "I figured you'd want to pack those items personally. Books, awards, memorabilia. The movers can handle furniture and electronics." "Thank you." I took a sip of coffee, its familiar taste a discordant note in our now unfamiliar relationship. "Is Ryan here?" The question emerged before I could reconsider its wisdom or purpose. Rebecca's expression shifted subtly, surprise followed by wariness. "No, he doesn't live here if that's what you're asking." "It wasn't," I lied. "Just wanted to avoid awkwardness if he was around." She studied me for a moment, perhaps assessing the honesty of my response. "We're taking things slowly. Whatever you may think of how this all happened, I'm not rushing from one domesticity to another." I nodded, acknowledging her point, without necessarily accepting it as exculpatory. We stood in uncomfortable silence until I gestured toward the hallway. "I'll start gathering my office items, if that's okay." "Of course." I spent the next hour methodically sorting through my home office, separating what to keep from what, to leave behind. Books that had shaped my thinking, awards from industry recognitions, photographs from NeuraTech's journey, our first office, product launches, team celebrations, the physical artifacts of a professional identity carefully cultivated. Over years, as I packed the final box, Rebecca appeared in the doorway. "Movers just called. They're 5 minutes out." "Perfect timing, just finished." She leaned against the doorframe, watching me tape the last box closed. "Heard the acquisition went through. Congratulations." "Thank you." I wasn't sure what else to say. Discussing NeuraTech's success felt inappropriate given how central it had been to our marriage's failure. "What will you do next?" she asked, echoing the question that had become my constant companion. "Still figuring that out," I replied automatically. "That's not like you. The Jim Wilson I know always has a plan, a strategy, a defined objective." "Maybe that Jim Wilson is part of what I'm leaving behind," I said, surprising myself with the admission. The relentless focus, the perpetual planning, it built NeuraTech but cost me everything else. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I don't think it was the work ethic or ambition that was the problem. It was the inability to be present even when you were physically there, to engage with anything that wasn't directly tied to your objectives. The observation stung with its accuracy. Even in our best times, I had approached personal life with the same efficiency mindset as professional challenges, problems to solve, systems to optimize, outcomes to achieve. The emotional presence Rebecca described had always eluded me. My mind perpetually divided between current moments and future plans. "I'm working on that," I said simply. Her response was interrupted by the doorbell, the movers arriving to collect my boxed belongings and remaining furniture. For the next hour, we moved in coordinated but separate orbits, directing different aspects of the process without directly engaging each other. As the movers loaded the final items into their truck, Rebecca and I found ourselves alone in the emptier house, standing in the entryway where we'd once welcomed friends for dinner parties and holiday gatherings. "I think that's everything," I said, looking around for any overlooked items. "Seems so." She hesitated, then extended her hand. "Good luck, Jim. I mean that sincerely. I took her hand, the simple contact carrying the weight of 15 shared years, and their unraveling. You too, Rebecca. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope we both do. I walked to my car without looking back, the symbolic weight of the moment not lost on me. Final boxes packed, keys surrendered, physical separation complete. The legal process would continue for weeks, but the practical dissolution of our shared life was now accomplished. Driving away, I felt an unexpected lightness alongside the inevitable grief. Not happiness exactly, but possibility, the unburdening that comes with endings when they create space for something new to emerge. My father's questions returned with fresh relevance. What kind of life did I want to create now? What was I building toward? For the first time since Rebecca's betrayal had upended my carefully structured existence, the questions felt less like burdens and more like invitations. The prenup had done its job, protecting what I'd built professionally when my personal life imploded. The acquisition had succeeded, validating years of work and sacrifice with tangible financial reward. Both victories had been necessary, but ultimately insufficient. They had secured my past investments, but said nothing about future directions. The settlement was finalized, the acquisition closed. Now came the real challenge, not protecting what was built, but building something worth protecting. Back at my temporary apartment, I unpacked only what was immediately necessary, leaving most boxes sealed. Their contents belonged to a life I was leaving behind, artifacts that might eventually find places in whatever came next, but weren't essential to the present moment of transition. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a document, unlike the strategic plans and technical roadmaps that had defined my professional life. This was something different, more exploration than execution, more questions than answers. A framework for rediscovering purpose beyond achievement, identity beyond professional success. I titled it simply, Next Chapter. 6 months after, the divorce was finalized. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking Portland's West Hills. The evening air carried the scent of spring, cherry blossoms, and new growth replacing winter's dormancy. My life had undergone similar renewal, tentative and incomplete, but undeniably in progress. The acquisition transition had concluded 2 months earlier, the integration of NeuraTech into Apex Technologies proceeding more smoothly than anticipated. I had fulfilled my contractual obligations, transferring knowledge and relationships to the new leadership team before stepping away completely. Eric remained as division head, thriving in the structure of corporate leadership in ways I never could have. My financial situation was secure beyond anything I'd imagined when starting NeuraTech in a garage 8 years earlier. The acquisition payout, $14 million in cash after taxes and $5 million in Apex stock, had transformed theoretical paper wealth into tangible resources. Financial freedom that should have felt like victory, but instead raised persistent questions about purpose and direction. My phone buzzed with a text from Andrew, a former NeuraTech developer who had left 6 months before the acquisition to launch his own venture. Still on for dinner? Bringing someone I think you should meet. I confirmed the plans, grateful for connections maintained despite professional transitions. When NeuraTech began, I'd focused exclusively on work relationships, viewing them as means to business ends rather than meaningful human connections. That perspective had shifted gradually during the divorce and its aftermath, as I recognized the artificial boundaries I'd created between professional and personal spheres. The dinner reservation was at Canard, a casual upscale restaurant where innovative small plates encouraged conversation alongside culinary exploration. Andrew arrived with a woman he introduced as Dr. Elena Mercer, a researcher specializing in algorithmic fairness and ethical AI. Unlike the carefully manufactured networking events that had dominated my previous life, this introduction carried No agenda beyond genuine belief in mutual interests. Jim pioneered some fascinating predictive models at NeuraTech, Andrew explained as we settled at our table. His work on supply chain optimization has practical applications for your research. Elena's intelligence was evident immediately, her questions precise and thoughtful. I'm particularly interested in how your algorithms handled edge cases. Predictive models often optimize for majority outcomes at the expense of outliers. That was actually our key differentiation, I explained, surprised by my own enthusiasm. After months of emotional distance from NeuraTech's work, traditional supply chain software treats disruptions as anomalies. We designed our core algorithm to incorporate disruption as an expected element rather than an exception. The conversation flowed naturally from technical discussions to broader implications of AI in society, Elena challenging assumptions I hadn't examined in years of focused execution. Her perspective wasn't combative, but expansively thoughtful, considering dimensions of impact I'd relegated to someone else's problem while building NeuraTech. The tools we create shape possibilities for millions, she noted over shared desserts. Technical excellence without ethical consideration is fundamentally incomplete. Her words resonated with realizations I'd been circling since the divorce. Technical excellence in building NeuraTech hadn't prevented catastrophic failure in my marriage. Optimization for business outcomes had come at the expense of human connection. Success by conventional metrics had masked profound deficiencies in areas that ultimately mattered more. As Andrew stepped away to take a call, Elena shifted the conversation. Andrew mentioned you're between ventures, exploring options. Something like that, I replied, taking time to reconsider fundamentals before jumping into the next thing. Rare luxury in tech, she observed. Most people bounce from one project to another without pause for reflection. Forced reflection, I admitted. Divorce has a way of prompting reassessment. Her expression showed empathy without pity. I went through something similar 3 years ago. Career acceleration coincided with relationship implosion. Classic story in our field. How did you navigate it? Badly at first, she laughed. Threw myself into work even harder, as if professional achievement could compensate for personal failure. Eventually realized they weren't separate domains, but aspects of the same core questions. What matters? What kind of life am I building? What impact do I want to have? Her articulation of questions I'd been circling created unexpected connection. For months, these thoughts had occupied private mental space, examined in isolation rather than shared conversation. Hearing them spoken aloud by someone who had traversed similar territory made them simultaneously more real and more approachable. When dinner concluded, Elena offered her card, an actual physical business card, charmingly anachronistic in our digital age. I'm speaking at Reed College next week on ethical dimensions of predictive algorithms. You might find it interesting. If you're free, I accepted the invitation without the calculated networking assessment that would have dominated my thinking a year earlier. This wasn't about professional advantage or strategic positioning. It was simply human connection around shared interests. Driving home, I reflected on how different this evening had felt compared to countless business dinners during NeuraTech's growth phase. Those had been transactional by design, means to specific outcomes, evaluated by measurable results. Tonight had no agenda beyond the interaction itself, no expected return on invested time. That difference represented the shift I'd been attempting to cultivate since the divorce. Moving from instrumentalist approaches to intrinsic valuation, from optimization to appreciation, from strategic to authentic engagement. The prenup had protected NeuraTech's financial value when my marriage collapsed, but no legal document could safeguard against the emptiness that resulted from treating relationships as means rather than ends. The following week, I attended Elena's lecture on algorithmic ethics, finding myself engaged by questions that would have seemed irrelevant distractions during NeuraTech's development. Afterward, we continued the discussion over coffee, conversation extending beyond professional topics to personal philosophies and experiences. "Have you considered teaching?" she asked when I described my uncertainty about next steps. "Your practical experience combined with your recent reflections would offer students valuable perspective." "Teaching hadn't crossed my mind," I admitted. "I've always been on the building side, not the academic side. The division isn't as clear as people think. The best technical education combines theoretical frameworks with practical application. Your experience bridges that gap." The suggestion planted a seed that germinated over subsequent weeks. I reached out to contacts at Portland State's Computer Science Department, exploring guest lecturer opportunities that might test compatibility without full commitment. To my surprise, the response was immediately enthusiastic, an invitation to design a specialized course on predictive algorithms for the upcoming term. Preparing that first course became unexpectedly engaging, requiring integration of technical knowledge with broader contextual understanding. I found myself researching ethical implications and societal impacts alongside mathematical models and implementation strategies. The work demanded holistic thinking rather than narrow optimization, precisely the shift I'd been attempting in my personal approach. 2 months into teaching, I received an email from Rebecca. Seeing her name in my inbox triggered a complex, emotional response. Not the sharp pain of early divorce days, but a duller recognition of significant history. Her message was simple. "Jim, I'm moving to Chicago next month for a new position. Before leaving Portland, I'd like to meet briefly, if you're open to it. Coffee sometime in the next few weeks, no agenda beyond proper closure." I considered declining, questioning whether further interaction served any purpose, but my instinct toward avoidance itself reflected old patterns I was working to change, the compartmentalization that had contributed to our marriage's failure. I responded with suggested times, and we arranged to meet at a neutral cafe, far from our old familiar spots. She looked different when she arrived, not drastically changed in appearance, but carrying herself with distinctive energy. The Rebecca I had known moved with precise efficiency. This woman entered with relaxed confidence, taking in her surroundings before spotting me at a corner table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, settling across from me. "I wasn't sure you would. 6 months ago, I probably wouldn't have," I admitted. "Perspective shifts with time." She nodded, understanding without requiring elaboration. "I heard through mutual friends that you're teaching now. That's unexpected." "For me too," I smiled slightly. "Life after divorce has involved significant recalibration." "I can relate to that." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, a gesture I remembered from countless mornings across our kitchen table. "That's partly why I wanted to see you before leaving, to acknowledge that recalibration and, I'm not sure, make peace." "Are we at war?" I asked, the question genuine rather than sarcastic. "Not actively," she conceded, "but there's unfinished emotional business between divorce proceedings and truly moving forward, at least for me." The acknowledgement of emotional dimensions would have been foreign in our marriage's final years, when practical considerations had dominated our limited interactions. That she was initiating such conversation now represented her own evolution paralleling mine. "What's in Chicago?" I asked, accepting the invitation to engage beyond surface pleasantries. "Creative director position with a boutique marketing firm. Smaller than my previous roles, but focused on sustainability clients I care about." "And Ryan?" The question emerged naturally without the bitter edge that would have accompanied it months earlier. "That ended shortly after our divorce. Finalized, she said simply. Another recalibration, realizing that what seems like an escape often isn't. We talked for nearly 2 hours, not about reconciliation or rekindled connection, but about parallel journeys of rediscovering authenticity after years of performance. About lessons learned through failure rather than success. About growth emerging from painful necessity rather than comfortable choice. "I owe you an apology," she said, as our conversation drew toward conclusion. "Not for wanting to end our marriage, that was ultimately necessary for both of us, but for how I went about it. The deception, the planning, the affair, those reflected my worst self, not my best." "I owe you one too," I responded. "Not for enforcing the prenup, that was legally appropriate given the circumstances, but for the years of emotional absence that preceded everything else. For treating our marriage as secondary to achievement rather than fundamental to life." Her eyes showed surprise at this acknowledgement, perhaps the first time I had fully articulated the pattern that had undermined our relationship long before Ryan entered the picture. "We made quite a pair," she observed with gentle irony, "excelling at external metrics while failing at essential connections." "Different lessons for different lives moving forward," I suggested. When we parted, the goodbye carried neither the formality of recent legal interactions nor the intimate familiarity of our married years. It was something new. Respectful acknowledgement between two people whose shared history had permanently shaped them, but whose futures would unfold separately. Walking back to my car, I felt unexpected lightness. Not happiness exactly, but the unburdening that comes with authentic closure. The legal proceedings had ended our marriage formally, but this conversation had completed something the courts couldn't address, the emotional reckoning necessary for genuine new beginnings. The next morning I received an unexpected call from Dr. Kavitha Nair, chair of Portland State's Computer Science Department. "Your guest lectures have received exceptional student feedback," she began without preamble. "We'd like to discuss a more permanent position. Associate Professor of Practice, focused on applied predictive algorithms with emphasis on ethical implementation." The offer represented perfect synthesis of past expertise and evolving values. Technical knowledge gained through building NeuraTech, now directed toward developing future technologists with broader perspective than I had possessed. At their stage, "I'm definitely interested," I replied, surprising myself with immediate certainty where ambivalence had dominated recent decisions. What would the position entail exactly? As Dr. Nair outlined responsibilities and expectations, I felt growing alignment between this opportunity and the recalibrated priorities I'd been developing since the divorce. Teaching demanded presence rather than constant future orientation. It valued impact beyond financial metrics. It required integration of technical expertise with human development. 2 weeks later, I accepted the position, transitioning from entrepreneur to educator with unexpected natural fit. My first semester included developing new curriculum that bridged theoretical foundations with practical applications, drawing directly from NeuraTech experiences while incorporating ethical dimensions I had previously neglected. Halfway through that term, I visited my father for our monthly dinner, a tradition established during divorce proceedings that had continued as meaningful connection rather than obligatory check-in. We sat on his deck overlooking Lake Oswego, grilling steaks as evening settled around us. "You seem different," he observed, handing me a beer from the cooler beside his chair. "More present." "Teaching requires it," I replied. "Can't be mentally calculating next quarter's projections during student questions." "It's more than professional necessity," he countered with the directness that had always characterized our relationship. "There's an integration I haven't seen before, less compartmentalization." His observation crystallized something I had been experiencing but hadn't fully articulated. Throughout NeuraTech's development and my marriage's dissolution, I had maintained rigid boundaries between professional and personal domains, different rules, different measures, different approaches for each. That separation had created efficiencies, but had ultimately undermined wholeness. The prenup protected what I built professionally, I acknowledged, but highlighted what I failed to build personally. Different success metrics for different domains doesn't work when they're fundamentally connected. My father nodded slowly, recognition in his eyes. Took me 20 years post-divorce to learn that lesson. You're ahead of schedule. Expensive tuition either way, I noted. Worth it if the learning sticks. As summer approached, I found myself drawn to Elena's perspective with increasing frequency. Our initial connection around algorithmic ethics had evolved into broader conversations about intentional living and integrated purpose. Cautiously respectful of recent transitions, we began exploring relationship beyond professional collaboration. One evening, as we walked along the Willamette waterfront after dinner, she asked the question that had once seemed straightforward, but had become increasingly complex. What do you want your life to be about now? Not achievement for its own sake, I replied without hesitation. Not optimization without purpose. Not professional success at the expense of personal connection. Those are negations, she observed. What are the affirmations? The question deserved careful consideration. After several minutes of thought, watching light play across the river's surface, I offered presence, integration, impact that considers both systems and individuals, work that matters without becoming all that matters. Elena's smile suggested recognition of shared values emerging from different paths. That sounds like foundation, not finish line. Exactly, I agreed. The prenup protected what I had built, but said nothing about what to build next. That's the real work now. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.